Testing, can you hear me? Testing, can you hear me? Alright. Hello everybody, Jeff Bartow here, and welcome to part 2 of the Iowa Caucuses. And after 3 or 4 days of waiting, we finally got the full results in. I think. Okay. Well, I got good news, bad news, and maybe some better news. Okay. First the bad news. First, apparent the results are in, and the winner is Pete Buttigieg. Yes, I know you're upset, but come on, you gotta. Hey, thank you for stopping. Thank you for stopping. Now, as I was saying, he just barely won, just barely. 26.2%. And Bernie won 26.1. And now for the good news. Bernie Sanders won the popular vote. Yes, I know you're excited. I know you're excited too. I'm excited that he won the popular vote. But oh, come on, man. Thank you. Now, as I was saying, now for the better news. Because of this whole fiasco, we're gonna do. I'm gonna show you. Gonna read you an article. So hold up and wait while I get that.
Advertisement. Iowa caucus remains too close to call with 100% of precincts reporting. DNC Chair Tom Perez calls for immediate recanvass of tally as Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders vie for victory. Iowa Caucuses, track the latest results. Pete Buttigieg expressed confidence over the Iowa caucus results on Thursday after days of chaotic vote tallying, even as the head of the Democratic National Party called on the state to recanvass the votes. Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders have remained neck and neck for most of the week, and the Associated Press declared on Thursday evening that the race was still too close to call. With 100% of precincts reporting, the pair were locked in a virtual tie. Buttigieg, leading by just 1.5 state delegate equivalents, had an advantage of about 0.1 percentage points. But that didn't stop Buttigieg from declaring victory on Twitter as he prepared to take the stage for a CNN event. "The first time I was here, few people knew me or how to pronounce my name. Now we've won the Iowa caucuses and we're just 5 days away from the New Hampshire primary," he wrote. The results come in a contest marred by fresh revelations about technical issues and reporting delays that have led to allegations of inaccuracy. Trump responds to impeachment acquittal with rambling, Wading into the growing chaos, the Democratic National Committee Chair, Tom Perez, called for a recanvass of the tally. Enough is enough. In light of the problems that have emerged in the implementation of the delegate selection plan and in order to assure public confidence in the results, I am calling on the Iowa Democratic Party to immediately begin a recanvass, Perez said on Twitter. He added in second tweet, a recanvass is a review of the worksheets from each caucus site to ensure accuracy. Speaking to Rachel Maddow on MSNBC on Thursday night, Perez called the caucus fiasco unacceptable but said he only sought a recanvass in certain precincts. In the grand scheme of things, he said, a recanvass would probably not affect the overall delegate math. But, the reason why I think it's important is because I want to make sure that every Iowa voter knows their vote was counted. At an event at his New Hampshire state campaign headquarters in Manchester on Thursday, Sanders touted his lead in the raw, popular
the buck stop with you. Everybody is mad at you. Everybody is mad at you. Do you understand why that is? Does the buck stop with you? Should people be mad at the National Democratic Party?
Well, listen, I understand that as part of the job. You know, what happened in Iowa was unacceptable, and the party chair has acknowledged that. He's apologized for that, and we've worked together over the last few days to fix the challenges. And I'm very relieved that we now have 90% or 100% reported. At the same time, there have been reports, and we've seen in the tabulation process that there were some questions raised. There was an example of a precinct in Black Hawk County where I think 83 state delegate equivalents were apportioned to Deval Patrick, which was a clear error. And so we all care. We have a shared interest in making sure we have accuracy. Mm-hmm. And so what we did today in asking to make sure that if people need a recanvass in this precinct or that precinct, that it's done. Because if people raise legitimate concerns about what happened in this precinct, we care about accuracy. That's why it took us longer, because our North Star was indeed accuracy. But
are you calling for a statewide recanvass, or are you calling for a recanvass in individual precincts?
No, we're calling for the latter. And we're calling for the latter because there were reports of concerns in a number of precincts. I don't know the precise number. And, you know, one of the things that is important for your viewers to understand is, in the grand scheme of things, you got to get 1,991 delegates to the National Convention to win the nomination. There are 41 in Iowa. And in all likelihood, you know, given that we have there's a concern here, a concern there, in a number of precincts, in all likelihood, that's not going to affect the national delegate math. The range of the allocation of those 41 is not likely to be affected by any additional review, because there are over 2,000 or so state delegate equivalents. The reason why I think it's important is because I want to make sure that every Iowa voter knows that their vote was counted, and I want to make sure every voter across this country knows that their vote was counted, and that we take our commitment to accuracy very seriously.
The concern that I have heard voiced about what happened in Iowa this week, that is not about the process failures, but that is about the prospect of beating Donald Trump in November, and that is that the turnout was flat. In 2008, turnout in the Iowa caucuses was astronomical, broke all the records, and by a lot. 2016, it came back down to earth. It appears that the turnout in Iowa this year was back down at that down-to-earth level, roughly 2016. And you can't extrapolate explicitly, but when I look at the numbers broadly, big Democratic numbers in Iowa, in the Iowa caucuses, tend to translate into Democratic Party wins in the general election. Are Democrats not enthusiastic enough about voting, and is that what those turnout numbers mean?
No, I don't think so. And I think we need to look at a broader set of data, which is 2017, 2018, 2019. Look at the Kentucky governor's race. You know, people don't know this, but not a lot of people know this, but Matt Bevin won something like 200,000 more votes in 2019 than he won in 2015, and he lost. Because turnout went from something like 850,000 to 1.4 million. And people came out, and they came out in droves. Why? Healthcare.
But they didn't come out in droves in Iowa. Well, and this was the first chance in the presidential race for Democrats to come show their stuff. They didn't turn out.
Well, and we'll see in New Hampshire and elsewhere. I mean, I don't extrapolate much from one race, and it's a conversation. You know, caucuses, even though there were satellite caucuses and other opportunities, you know, the reality is it's harder for people to vote. You know, if you got a shift job, if you're there, and you know, make no mistake about it. You know, Barack Obama is a historic figure, and when we benchmark everything against Barack Obama, that is an undeniably high bar. But again, when you look at all of the turnout successes we've had over 3 years, I'm certainly not going to sit here after one caucus and say there's a problem, Houston. I'm certainly watching that, but again, I think the energy is everywhere, and I see it in all my travels and the candidates as well.
The concern that I have
State campaign headquarters in Manchester. At an event at his New Hampshire state campaign headquarters in Manchester on Thursday, Sanders touted his lead in the raw, popular vote in Iowa, while Buttigieg is slightly ahead in the allocation of party delegate votes, which is the tally that ultimately determines the party nominee. Advertised The Electoral College is a body of electors established by the United States Constitution, which forms every 4 years for the sole purpose of electing the President and Vice President of the United States. The Electoral College consists of 538 electors, and an absolute majority of at least 270 electoral votes is required to win election. According to Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution, each state legislature determines the manner by which its state's electors are chosen. Each state's number of electors is equal to the combined total of the state's membership in the Senate and House of Representatives. Currently there are 100 senators and 435 representatives. 123 Additionally, the 23rd Amendment, ratified in 1961, provides that the District of Columbia, D.C., is entitled to the number of electors it would have if it were the least populated state. Presently 3.4 U.S. territories are not entitled to any electors as they are not states 5-6. Following the national presidential election, which takes place the Tuesday after the first Monday of November, each state counts its popular votes according to that state's laws to designate presidential electors. Nearly all states allot all their electoral votes to the winning candidate in that state, no matter how close the candidates win, but 2 states rely on a variation of proportional representation. 7 electors are typically required to pledge to vote for the winning candidate, but there is an ongoing legal dispute about whether electors are required to vote as they pledged. State electors meet in their respective state capitals the first Monday after the second Wednesday of December to cast their votes. 8. The results are counted by Congress, where they are tabulated nationally in the first week of January before a joint meeting of the Senate and House of Representatives, presided over by the Vice President, acting as President of the Senate. 9. If a majority of votes are not cast for a candidate, the House turns itself into a presidential election session, where 1 vote is assigned to each of the 50 states, excluding the District of Columbia. The elected president and vice president are inaugurated on January 20th. While the electoral vote has generally given the same result as the popular vote, this has not been the case in several elections, most recently in the 2016 election. The Electoral College system is a matter of ongoing debate. Supporters of the Electoral College argue that it is fundamental to American federalism, that it requires candidates to appeal to voters outside large cities, increases the political influence of small states, preserves the 2-party system, and makes the electoral outcome appear more legitimate than that of a nationwide popular vote. 10. Opponents of the Electoral College argue that it can result in different candidates winning the popular and electoral vote, which occurred in 2 of the 5 presidential elections from 2000 to 2016, that it causes candidates to focus their campaigning disproportionately in a few swing states, and that its allocation of Electoral College votes gives citizens in less populated states, example Wyoming, as much as 4 times the voting power as those in more populous states, example California. 11. 12. Alternative methods of choosing electors. Edit. Methods of presidential elector selection, by state, 1789, 1832 107. Year. AL. Key. A. Popular vote, at large. D. Popular vote, districting. L. Legislative selection. H. Hybrid system. Before the advent of the short ballot in the early 20th century, as described above, the most common means of electing the presidential electors was through the general ticket. The general ticket is quite similar to the current system and is often confused with it. In the general ticket, voters cast ballots for individuals running for presidential elector, while in the short ballot, voters cast ballots for an entire slate of electors. In the general ticket, the state canvass would report the number of votes cast for each candidate for elector, a complicated process in states like New York with multiple positions to fill. Both the general ticket and the short ballot are often considered at-large or winner-takes-all voting. The short ballot was adopted by the various states at different times. It was adopted for use by North Carolina and Ohio in 1932. Alabama was still using the general ticket as late as 1960 and was one of the last states to switch to the short ballot. The question of the extent to which state constitutions may constrain the legislature's choice of a method of choosing electors has been touched on in 2 U.S. Supreme Court cases. In McPherson v. Blacker, 146 U.S. 1, 1892, the court cited Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, which states that a state's electors are selected in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct, and wrote these words, operati as a limitation upon the state in respect of any attempt to circumscribe the legislative power. In Bush v. Palm Beach County Canvassing Board, 531 U.S. 70, 2000, a Florida Supreme Court decision was vacated, not reversed, based on McPherson. On the other hand, 3 dissenting justices in Bush v. Gore, 531 U.S. 98, 2000, wrote, An authing in Article 2 of the federal constitution frees the state legislature from the constraints in the state constitution that created it. 108. Appointment by state legislature edit. In the earliest presidential elections, state legislative choice was the most common method of choosing electors. A majority of the state legislatures selected presidential electors in both 1792, 9 of 15, and 1800, 10 of 16, and half of them did so in 1812. 109. Even in the 1824 election, a quarter of state legislatures, 6 of 24, chose electors. In that election, Andrew Jackson lost in spite of having plurality of the popular vote and the number of electoral votes representing them 110, but 6 state legislatures chose electors that overturned that result. Some state legislatures simply chose electors, while other states used a hybrid method in which state legislatures chose from a group of electors elected by popular vote. 111. By 1828, with the rise of Jacksonian democracy, only Delaware and South Carolina used legislative choice. 110. Delaware ended its practice the following election, 1832, while South Carolina continued using the method until it seceded from the Union in December 1860. 110. South Carolina used the popular vote for the first time in the 1868 election. 112. Excluding South Carolina, legislative appointment was used in only 4 situations after 1832. In 1848, Massachusetts statute awarded the state's electoral votes to the winner of the at-large popular vote, but only if that candidate won an absolute majority. When the vote produced no winner between the Democratic, Free Soil, and Whig parties, the state legislature selected the electors, giving all 12 electoral votes to the Whigs. 113. In 1864, Nevada, having joined the Union only a few days prior to Election Day, had no choice but to legislatively appoint 113. In 1868, the newly reconstructed state of Florida legislatively appointed its electors, having been readmitted too late to hold elections. 113. Finally, in 1876, the legislature of the newly admitted state of Colorado used legislative choice due to a lack of time and money to hold a popular election. 113. Legislative appointment was brandished as a possibility in the 2000 election. Had the recount continued, the Florida legislature was prepared to appoint the Republican slate of electors to avoid missing the federal safe harbor deadline for choosing electors. 114. The Constitution gives each state legislature the power to decide how its state's electors are chosen. 110. And it can be easier and cheaper for a state legislature to simply appoint a slate of electors than to create a legislative framework for holding elections to determine the electors. As noted above, the 2 situations in which legislative choice has been used since the Civil War have both been because there was not enough time or money to prepare for an election. However, appointment by state legislature can have negative consequences. Bicameral legislatures can deadlock more easily than the electorate. This is precisely what happened to New York in 1789 when the legislature failed to appoint any electors. 115. Electoral districts edit. Another method used early in U.S. history was to divide the state into electoral districts. By this method, voters in each district would cast their ballots for the electors they supported and the winner in each district would become the elector. This was similar to how states are currently separated by congressional districts. However, the difference stems from the fact that every state always had 2 more electoral districts than congressional districts. As with congressional districts, moreover, this method is vulnerable to gerrymandering. Proportional vote edit. Under such a system, electors would be selected in proportion to the votes cast for their candidate or party, rather than being selected by the statewide plurality vote. 116. The states of Maine and Nebraska use a method of a proportional vote to choose electors instead of the winner-takes-all system. 117. Congressional district method edit. There are 2 versions of the congressional district method, one has been implemented in Maine and Nebraska, another has been proposed in Virginia. Under the implemented congressional district method, the electoral votes are distributed based on the popular vote winner within each of the state's congressional districts. The statewide popular vote winner receives 2 additional electoral votes. 118. In 2013, a different version of the congressional district method was proposed in Virginia. This version would distribute Virginia's electoral votes based on the popular vote winner within each of Virginia's congressional districts. the two statewide electoral votes would be awarded based on which candidate won the most congressional districts, rather than on who won Virginia's statewide popular vote 119. The congressional district method can more easily be implemented than other alternatives to the winner-takes-all method, in view of major party resistance to relatively enabling third parties under the proportional method. State legislation is sufficient to use this method. 120 advocates of the congressional district method believe the system would encourage higher voter turnout and incentivize presidential candidates to broaden their campaigns in non-competitive states. 121 winner-take-all systems ignore thousands of popular votes. In Democratic California there are Republican districts. In Republican Texas there are Democratic districts. Because candidates have an incentive to campaign in competitive districts, with a district plan, candidates have an incentive to actively campaign in over 30 states versus 7 swing states. 122-123. Opponents of the system, however, argue candidates might only spend time in certain battleground districts instead of the entire state, and cases of gerrymandering could become exacerbated as political parties attempt to draw as many safe districts as they can. 124. Unlike simple congressional district comparisons, the district plan popular vote bonus in the 2008 election would have given Obama 56% of the Electoral College versus the 68% he did win. It would have more closely approximated the percentage of the popular vote 153%. 125. Implementation edit. Of the 43 multi-district states whose 514 electoral votes could be affected by the congressional district method, only Maine, 4 and Nebraska, 5 currently utilize this allocation method. 126 Maine began using the congressional district method in the election of 1972. Nebraska has used the congressional district method since the election of 1992. 128 Michigan used the system for the 1892 presidential election. 118 129 130 and several other states used various forms of the district plan before 1840. Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, North Carolina, Massachusetts, Illinois, Maine, Missouri, and New York. 131. The congressional district method allows a state the chance to split its electoral votes between multiple candidates. Prior to 2008, neither Maine nor Nebraska had ever split their electoral votes. 118 Nebraska split its electoral votes for the first time in 2008, giving John McCain its statewide electors and those of 2 congressional districts, while Barack Obama won the electoral vote of Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. 132 Following the 2008 split, some Nebraska Republicans made efforts to discard the congressional district method and return to the winner-takes-all system. 133 In January 2010, a bill was introduced in the Nebraska legislature to revert to a winner-take-all system. 134 The bill died in committee in March 2011. 135 Republicans had also passed bills in 1995 and 1997 to eliminate the congressional district method in Nebraska, but those bills were vetoed by Democratic Governor Ben Nelson. 133. In 2010, Republicans in Pennsylvania, who controlled both houses of the legislature as well as the governorship, put forward a plan to change the state's winner-takes-all system to a congressional district method system. Pennsylvania had voted for the Democratic candidate in the 5 previous presidential elections, so some saw this as an attempt to take away Democratic electoral votes. Although Democrat Barack Obama won Pennsylvania in 2008, he won only 55% of Pennsylvania's popular vote. The district plan would have awarded him 11 of its 21 electoral votes, a 52.4%, which was much closer to the popular vote percentage. 136-137 The plan later lost support. 138 other Republicans, including Michigan State Representative Pete Lund, 139 RNC Chairman Reince Priebus, and Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, have floated similar ideas. 140-141. Contemporary issues edit. Arguments between proponents and opponents of the current electoral system include 4 separate but related topics: indirect election, disproportionate voting power by some states, the winner-takes-all distribution method, as chosen by 48 of the 50 states, and federalism. Arguments against the Electoral College in common discussion focus mostly on the allocation of the voting power among the states. Gary Bugha's research of congressional debates over proposed constitutional amendments to abolish the Electoral College reveals reform opponents have often appealed to a traditional Republican version of representation, whereas reform advocates have tended to reference a more democratic view. 142, 143, 144. Criticism. Edit. Non-determinacy of popular vote. Edit. See also, United States presidential elections in which the winner lost the popular vote. This graphic demonstrates how the winner of the popular vote can still lose in a hypothetical electoral college system. Bar graph of popular votes in presidential elections, through 2016. Black stars mark the 5 cases where the winner did not have the plurality of the popular vote. Black squares mark the 2 cases where the electoral vote resulted in a tie, or the winner did not have the majority of electoral votes. An H marks each of 2 cases where the election was decided by the House. An S marks the 1 case where the election was finalized by the Supreme Court. The elections of 1876, 1888, 2000, and 2016 produced an electoral college winner who did not receive at least a plurality of the nationwide popular vote. 145 in 1824. There were 6 states in which electors were legislatively appointed, rather than popularly elected, so it is uncertain what the national popular vote would have been if all presidential electors had been popularly elected. When no candidate received a majority of electoral votes in 1824, the election was decided by the House of Representatives and so could be considered distinct from Republicans in Pennsylvania, who controlled both houses of the legislature as well as the governorship, put forward a plan to change. VE floated similar ideas. 141. Contemporary In a disgruntled mood, he also referred to the problems tabulating the results. That screw-up has been extremely unfair to the people of Iowa, Sanders said, adding, "I want to thank the people of Iowa for the very strong victory they gave us." Sanders said his campaign was ahead of the former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg and his rivals by about 6,000 votes. "Our campaign is winning the popular initial vote by some 6,000 popular votes," Sanders said. Sanders said he expected either he or Buttigieg to lead among delegate statistics by a tiny margin. However, the controversies that have dogged the vote since results tallying problems emerged almost as soon as polls closed continued on Thursday. The New York Times reported that one tranche of results released by the state Democratic Party on Wednesday were riddled with inconsistencies and other flaws. The paper said that its own reporting showed that, in some cases, vote tallies do not add up. In others, precincts are shown allotting the wrong number of delegates to certain candidates. And in at least a few cases, the Iowa Democratic Party's reported results do not match those reported by the precincts. The deadlocked contest gives both Buttigieg and Sanders a burst of momentum as they seek to pull away from the crowded field. The nearly complete results show them leading the Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, with former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Amy Klobuchar trailing. But the results in Iowa were muddied by the stunning breakdown of the caucus reporting process in a state that traditionally kicks off presidential nominating contests. Iowa officials initially attributed a delay in reporting results to technical problems with an app that precinct chairs were supposed to use to record votes, then to backlogs as those volunteers tried to call the party to submit their totals. Much of the political world has already shifted its attention to next up New Hampshire, which holds the first primary election in the Democrats' 2020 nomination fight on Tuesday. Buttigieg and Sanders are separated by 40 years in age and conflicting ideology. Sanders, a 78-year-old self-described democratic socialist, has been a progressive powerhouse for decades. Buttigieg, a 38-year-old former municipal official, represents the more moderate wing of the Democratic Party. Buttigieg is also the first openly gay candidate to earn presidential primary delegates from a major political party. Sanders and his supporters raised issues with the primary process after the 2016 election, prompting the Democratic National Committee to make changes that affected the Iowa reporting regulations. As a result, Iowa released 3 sets of data from the caucuses: the tally of voter preferences at the start of the caucus, their preferences after supporters of candidates who reached less than 15% made a second choice, and the results of state delegate equivalents. The final alignment results are used to determine state delegate equivalents, which is the metric the AP has long used to call the winner of the caucus. Democrats pick their nominee based on delegate totals. Associated Press contributed to this report. America faces an epic choice in the coming year, and the results will define the country for a generation. These are perilous times. Over the last 3 years, much of what The Guardian holds dear has been threatened: democracy, civility, truth. This U.S. administration is establishing new norms of behavior. Anger and cruelty disfigure public discourse and lying is commonplace. Truth is being chased away. But with your help we can continue to put it center stage. Rampant disinformation, partisan news sources and social media's tsunami of fake news is no basis on which to inform the American public in 2020. The need for a robust, independent press has never been greater, and with your support we can continue to provide fact-based reporting that offers public scrutiny and oversight. Our journalism is free and open for all, but it's made possible thanks to the support we receive from readers like you across America in all 50 states. America is at a tipping point, finely balanced between truth and lies, hope and hate, civility and nastiness. Many vital aspects of American public life are in play: the Supreme Court, abortion rights, climate policy, wealth inequality, big tech, and much more. The stakes could hardly be higher. As that choice nears, The Guardian, as it has done for 200 years, and with your continued support, will continue to argue for the values we hold dear: facts, science, diversity, equality, and fairness. U.S. Editor, John Mulholland. On the occasion of its 100th birthday in 1921, the editor of The Guardian said, "Perhaps the chief virtue of a newspaper is its independence. It should have a soul of its own. That is more true than ever. Freed from the influence of an owner or shareholders, The Guardian's editorial independence is our unique driving force and guiding principle." We also want to say a huge thank you to everyone who generously supports The Guardian. You provide us with the motivation and financial support to keep doing what we do. Every reader contribution, big or small, is so valuable. Support The Guardian from as little as $1, it only takes a minute. Thank you. Support The Guardian. Iowa caucus results in full, county by county. Get the results in the crucial first voting state. A quick guide to the chaos of the Iowa caucuses. Help us cover the critical issues of 2020. Consider making a contribution. Jeweek Adolph and Sean Clark. Thursday, February 6, 2020, 21.11 EST. 264. Iowa voters kicked off the long process of choosing the Democratic and Republican parties' presidential nominees Monday, ahead of the November election. Following a shock delay, the first partial results were released on Tuesday and continued to trickle in through Wednesday and Thursday. Election results source, Associated Press. What is a caucus and how is it different to a primary? Most U.S. states hold primary elections, in which voters go to a polling place, mail in their ballots or otherwise vote remotely. But a handful of states hold caucuses, complicated, hours-long meetings, which continue until one candidate emerges as victor. And the process is different for Democrats and Republicans. How do the Democratic caucuses work and why are they important? Iowans aged 18 and over who are registered with the party will gather in caucus venues such as school gyms and churches in their designated precinct. They start voting publicly at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, by splitting into groups based on their preferred candidate. Voters have to go and stand in the area where their candidate is represented. So Joe Biden supporters would be in one corner, Elizabeth Warren in another and Bernie Sanders supporters in another. Everyone is tallied. If a particular candidate does not attract 15% of total voters present, they are taken off the ballot, and their voters are free to throw their weight behind another candidate. Once voting is over at a caucus site, the support for viable candidates, those with more than 15% of the votes, is translated into a number of state delegate equivalents. That result is used to calculate the number of national delegates each candidate receives. National delegates eventually choose the nominee at the Democratic Convention in July. On the night of the caucuses, the candidate with the most SDEs is considered the winner. How do the Republican caucuses work? With all the attention being paid to the Democratic side, it is easy to forget that there is a Republican primary happening. Trump is facing challenges from the former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld and former U.S. Representative Joe Walsh, but it's extremely unlikely that they, or the others, according to the Federal Election Commission, 153 people are running for president as Republicans, will win against the president. In the Iowa Republican caucus, people still have to physically show up at a location. They then cast a straightforward vote, secretly. The votes are tallied up, and the delegates are dished out in the same manner. In the Republican caucuses, there is no 15% threshold, meaning candidates with relatively little support could still pick up delegates. Jeweek Adolph and Sean Clark. The law. Candidate. Votes. PCT. Pete Buttigieg. 564. 26.21%. Bernie Sanders. Pete Buttigieg leads by 0.09 point margin. Donald Trump leads by 95.83 point margin. Candidate. Votes. PCT. Pete Buttigieg. 564. 26.21%. Bernie Sanders. 562. 26.12%. Elizabeth Warren. 387. 17.98%. Joe Biden. 341. 15.85%. Amy Klobuchar. 264. 12.27%. Andrew Yang. 22. 1.02%. Tom Steyer. 7. 0.33%. Uncommitted. 4. 0.19%. Other. 1. 0.05%. Michael Bennet. 0. 0%. Michael Bloomberg. 0. 0%. John Delaney. 0. 0%. Tulsi Gabbard. 0. 0%. Deval Patrick. 0. 0%. 99.94% precincts reporting. Note, results displayed are state delegate equivalents, which represent the number of state convention delegates won by each candidate. AP multiplies county results by 100 to avoid fractions. Updated, February 6, 2020, 8:57 p.m. EST. Politics 101. How do you know your mail-in ballot was counted? Tuesday, May 8, 2018. By Brooke Ruth, Maureen Kavanaugh. Photo by Katie Skolov. Above, voters turn in their mail-in ballots at the San Diego Registrar Office, June 7, 2016. The California gubernatorial primary this year is June 5, but that's not the only date that's important. There are other deadlines to keep in mind that could determine whether you get to vote, or if your vote will count. How do we know our mail-in ballot is counted? San Diego County Registrar of Voters Michael Vu said voters can look up whether their mail ballot was counted on the registrar's voter portal. Information such as the voter's assigned polling place, sample ballot, and voter information pamphlet and status of their mail ballot can be viewed, including when it was mailed to the voter and when it was returned. We've had this tool for a number of years and election cycles. Several years ago, a law was passed to post whether a person's mail ballot was counted. This information is posted after we have certified the election, Vu wrote in an email. The deadline to request a mail-in ballot is May 29th. Another important date is coming up on May 21st. That's the deadline to register to vote in the primary. What do you need to register to vote and where do you have to go? Mesa College political science professor Carl Luna said, the easiest way now is to just go online to the Secretary of State's office or the San Diego County Registrar of Voters website and it walks you through the process. If you do it online you need to have a driver's license or a state ID that you can use. In person, you can bring other IDs in. But, it's not that difficult of a process if you go to any post office or a government agency to get the forms. The difficulty is you've got to remember to do it. We're one of the only countries in the world that puts that on the voters. How does voter pre-registration work? Luna said, you do it the same way that you register to vote if you are over the age of 18. When you're 16, 17 you go in, either online or in person, and do the voter registration and when you turn 18 you're ready to vote at that point. What is the deadline to mail in your ballot? Vu said once the polls close at 8 p.m. on election day the registrar of voters in all voting precincts cannot accept mail ballots not postmarked on or before election day. Mail ballots that are postmarked on election day and received by the Friday, 3 days, after election day are eligible to be counted. This is known as postmark +3, he said. Do you have a question about local politics, local elections, or why the process works the way it does? If so, ask us here. San Diego Politics 101, the KPBS Midday Edition segment where your questions get answered. Editor's note, an earlier version of this story contained inaccuracies about mail ballot procedures. The story has been updated to reflect correct information. We regret the errors. Feature in this section. How vote-by-mail ballots are counted. We welcome and encourage members of the public to visit our office and observe how we process and count ballots. Vote-by-mail, VBM, ballots are counted in the same way as other ballots, only the advance processing is different. When VBMs arrive in the elections office the signature on each envelope is checked to make sure that the person who signed the envelope is the same person who is registered. After the signatures are verified, the ballots, still in their envelopes, are sorted by precinct and stored until processing begins. 10 business days before Election Day, we begin processing the VBMs. The ballots are removed from their envelopes and placed in precinct-specific bags ready for scanning. The first vote counts that are announced on election night are the VBM ballots that were processed and scanned the week before Election Day. VBMs returned to polling places are not included in the election night results because they must be processed before they can be scanned and counted. Before we process these ballots, we first verify that the voters who submitted them did not also vote at a polling place in Yolo County. These votes are tallied and the totals reported when everything has been checked. This process is usually finished several weeks after the election. Filed under Voting.
Well, that's it. Because if they do, if they do call a recount in Iowa, that means we're gonna expect a part 3 in this video. So for now, that's a wrap. Bye.